Okay, here we go. Boom.
All right, we are live in studio. I got the crew, the legal crew today. We got a lot to talk about. We got everything from affirmative action to the whole TYT nonsense going on. I don't know if you guys heard of the Young Turks nonsense going on. And then there's a lot of political stuff going on there too. So hello everyone in the chat. I'm sorry, everybody. Please blame me. It's totally my fault that we're late. I totally forgot I was hosting this today, but now I remembered. So now we're all here. Let me introduce my guest, Southern Law, Steve from Southern Law, up there at the top. Say hello to the people.
Hey, Nate. Hey, guys.
We got Steve Gosney, the extraordinaire. Me and Steve butt heads all the time, but Steve, you got to tell them about the book. Where can they find the book? The book is amazing.
We butt heads? Really? I don't remember that, but if you say so. Yeah, all my books, stevegosney.com. There's Ideas and Answers in Law, which is about lots of common problems confronting the criminal lawyer. There's Prepare, which is about learning to be free as an individual. And there's Death Penalty Debates, framing the issues on the death penalty debate so that empowering you to decide where you stand on the issue.
Oops. All right, there it is. And people, you can find that on Amazon, right?
Nope.
Oh, where can
Only
you find it?
from me, stevegosney.com.
Only from Steve. You can get it. Boom. Uncivil Law. We all know Uncivil Law from the channel Uncivil Law, formerly the Internet Law Review. But boom, Joe Good Logic. I've been
yo. What up, Brooklyn?
And the Canadian refugee, Viva.
Well,
what's going on, Viva?
I got a question for Uncivil. Uncivil, have you been accused of replicating the Ukrainian flag with your backdrop?
It's just a random. No, I have not. It is just a random color palette that was chosen today.
Well, let the rumors start, people.
That's right. Viva.
They don't own yellow and blue.
I was listening to Ralphie May. Chrissy Mayer retweeted one of Ralphie May's bits about the rainbow, and he's like, "I like the rainbow." Ralphie May was one of the greatest ever. Ralphie May stand-up comic, for anybody who doesn't know, and Chrissy Mayer, current stand-up comic, classic stuff.
Oh wow. Well, let's jump into some interesting legal stuff that's been happening. Well, the first, obviously, the Supreme Court, affirmative action. Then you had the case out of Colorado with the. So, which one do you guys want to start with? You guys want to start to touch on affirmative action a little bit, or do we jump right into the whole LGBT? Because right now the left is saying the Supreme Court is crazy and needs to be stopped at all costs. So,
who's the guy from The Sopranos now that said since discrimination is legal, he's going to ban bigots from watching his show?
Michael Imperioli.
Oh, Nate, start with the affirmative action one and the idiotic, dishonest, or absolutely ignorant response from legacy media.
Well, all right. So I'm just going to do just brief background, not the affirmative action, just what's going on. So obviously the Supreme Court struck down affirmative action and essentially said that this was a remedial measure that's been going on for 70 years. We're going to stop it going forward. Now, the response from the left is that, number one, Black and minority students are not going to be able to go to college or get these opportunities without affirmative action. So the criticism of that is that, it's essentially you're racist against Black people because you're saying that that they can't achieve, parity with anyone. You're saying that they have to have a hand up even for 70 years. And then the second one is about Clarence Thomas. They're saying Clarence Thomas automatically, because he's Black, he was an affirmative action hire both in the Supreme Court and in the federal judiciary. And the other side is saying that's just not true. He was qualified. He was qualified at college. He was qualified all the way up, all the way through. So just to assume that he's an affirmative action hire is essentially racist.
It proves the point. Who was admitted explicitly because she was a Black woman, like that was said out loud many times.
Joe is right. It proves the point that even the left now says, well, he owes us something because he got in on this, and they assume that he did, even if he didn't. I couldn't find a determinative answer to that question, but it seems mildly racist and mildly demeaning to say he's Black, therefore he benefited from affirmative action. I mean, I don't know what evidence there is to suggest that he did.
Here's the thing. I don't think even Clarence Thomas would know if he clearly was in the realm compared to most humans on the planet to getting into Yale. But whether or not that final push came because of his melanin, I don't think even he knows. So it's like, and that's the sad thing. That's exactly the problem. That it's like that now everyone's assuming, oh yeah, you bypass certain people because you have darker skin. It's such an affront to every minority.
He'll never be able to escape that taint, which is exactly the problem. It's like, okay, no matter how capable and how competent and how excellent you are, you're always going to get that diss from the left. It's like, well, we know, and that's the whole problem, is the asterisk. And that's what we need to get rid of. And in fact, if there's any affirmative action hires on the court, it's Jackson, not Thomas.
Yeah.
Clearly, right? That's exactly what he said. I'm going to hire a black woman, and here she is.
But just imagine, I mean, the next wave of potential law students, if the smartest 10 on the planet happen to be black kids, everyone would just assume that they got into Yale because they were beneficiaries and dismiss their accomplishment that they did throughout their undergrad work and all their other accomplishments that they had to attain that prestigious status, which really is prestigious status. If you're outside the law community, you cannot appreciate how attorneys, when we see someone who went to Yale or Harvard, I mean, we understand that doesn't mean they're going to be necessarily effective attorneys, but we understand that we worked our tails off to get into the best school possible, and they did it better. And seeing as how we all, work on a certain level of what's the word I'm looking
brain
for?
fart is what's happened now.
Yes, real-time brain fart.
Joe,
we all work on a certain amount of pride that, we have the ability to accomplish things. And we have that capacity. You see someone who did it better than you, there's a higher level of respect. Thank you for calling my brain fart there.
I've never had that sentiment. Maybe it's because I went to a provincial university.
Oh, you're right.
My experience with Yale, all that I've noticed is that they tend to take a lot of pride in their perceived accomplishments. But what I love about this, I can see someone watching this right now and saying 5 white dudes have no business talking about affirmative action, and only Nate can talk about it. But Nate had better agree with us, because if he doesn't, we're going to give him the Clarence Thomas treatment. It's like white people can't talk about it, and black people, if they do, have to agree. Otherwise, they are hypocrites. It's a foregone conclusion with people who want to justify their own soft bigotry of low expectations, otherwise just known as hard bigotry.
But I got to throw it back.
Why did you assume that Nate is the only black person on the panel? Are you assuming my race?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I might have more, North African blood. I don't know. I've never done those 22andMe things, but
but all right. So now
I'm trans Native American.
The other side's argument. So the other side's argument is this: we all say we want to do based on merit, but we have an issue. Right, the schools generally, schools in the black community are not as good as schools in the white community. It's generally there's a term in New York. It's called the Harlem to Stafford, or I forget the name of the affluent white community. And there's a gap in between test scores. Usually, if you're in Harlem, you're scoring, or in the Bronx, you're scoring at the lowest, versus if you're in Lower Manhattan, you're scoring some of the highest. And these are in public schools in New York City. And for instance, also in New York City, it's one of the most segregated. It is the most segregated school system.
It is the most segregated school district in the nation, as John Oliver pointed out. So the most segregated school district in the nation is New York City.
So their argument is that.
So maybe that's the problem.
We know, especially for law school. For law school, let's just, and these are facts. I'm going to bring you with test scores. The average LSAT score, for those of you who don't know what the LSAT is a test that goes from 120 to 180. The average score is a 150. If you are white, the average, but if you take that by race, it's different. If you're white, the average test score is about 153. And if you're Asian, I think it's 154 or 155. But if you're black, it's 143. And if you're Hispanic, it's 138. So most blacks, the average black person taking that test doesn't even meet the average score on the LSAT. And the average score is what generally gets you into law school. So what do you say to those people who say, well, we see from the test scores that even that the average black and Latino and minority score is so much less. If we were to just do it by merit, they would not be able to get into these schools, or you would just have such a few get in that it wouldn't really show any diversity into the legal system. They wouldn't know the issues going forward. Go ahead, guys. I'm just giving you the argument. I don't agree with this argument.
Fix the underlying problem.
Argument. I don't agree with this argument. Go ahead, Steve. Steve wants to say something.
Well, the problem there is called mismatch. And that is that what happens is, like, let's assume that MIT is promoting people based on this racial factor. Well, a kid who doesn't score as well on the test, but is promoted into a pool of students, he might succeed, might become a great engineer if he went to, say, University of Central Florida, right? He'd be top of his class or maybe middle of the class. He'd get his degree and he'd go on and do great things, have a happy life. But instead he gets promoted into some place like MIT or Caltech. And now he's like the bottom of the class. And then there's the chip on the shoulder problem. It's like, well, maybe I'm just dumb. And then he maybe fails out, and they don't care because they admitted they got the statistic, and they don't care about that student who fails out. That's called the mismatch problem. And that's one of the toxic things about affirmative action. A kid who is smart and who would do great and should be matched with the appropriate college is then put in above his head, and we're forcing that person to fail. It's really a sin. And that's a big problem with affirmative action.
Go ahead, Viva.
Two things. Let's assume that the statistics are accurate. And then the questions are going to be the why. Because the solution doesn't remedy the problem. Sticking people who don't meet these, whether or not these criteria are arbitrary and non-representative of capacity. I think they are. I didn't do well on my LSATs. I didn't do well on my bar exam. I think I was a decent lawyer. But let's assume the stats are accurate. The affirmative action does not resolve the underlying problem. It might have to do with the quality of educational systems. It might have to do with, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., during one of his many appearances on recent tour, he was saying, back in the day, he was remarking that they were disposing of toxic waste in predominantly black neighborhoods, poor neighborhoods. And the trickle off, there were some environmental catastrophes that led to kids basically being poisoned with mercury. If there are other reasons that are explaining or accounting for this problem, address them. The solution of affirmative action does not address it whatsoever. It probably only exacerbates it for the reasons Steve said. But also, I think it's factually incorrect that historically black universities, I'm trying to pull up an article here. Historically black colleges and universities produce better results for black students than the Ivy Leagues, where they allow them in under affirmative action. So it doesn't solve the problem, and it sure as hell is not contributing to a solution.
One thing I'll say is no one has all the answers, but I think we can all agree this has been going on for 70 years. And at what point, and this was one thing I think Uncivil Law brought up, they said the court kept asking the proponents, at what point does this end, right? Even if we let it go on, when does it get parity? So Steve, Southern Law, what do you think about that argument that, we have to go on a little bit longer, but then the other side says we don't know when it's going to end? What do you think about the proponent's argument?
Well, I think like any kind of program like this, you set it up, it becomes a life of its own. There are high-paid people who make money continuing this kind of problem. Why solve it? All they're going to do is sit in a room with a spreadsheet and balance out people on the basis of their color alone. That ought to be offensive to people, even if it is necessary or wasn't necessary for a period of time. But there are some people, I feel, that for affirmative action, it was not whether there was a group on top of whatever color, but just which group is on top. Mm-hmm. And I think you see in universities now, to me, are less tolerant than they were 20 or 30 years ago of any dissenting viewpoints. And it's almost comical to watch them claim how great diversity is for a vibrant thought base in the university of different perspectives, when they are now trying to enforce a unified perspective and punish people who disagree with it at all. And of course, the Supreme Court said, you don't have to not take race into the equation, but you have to take it into the equation on the basis of how it affects the individual student that you're on the edge of letting in or not letting in. Oh, we can't have that. How can we judge someone by the content of their character when we want to judge them by the color of their skin? So I'm not somebody who thinks, well, yay, we had a civil rights movement, so African Americans were instantly on the same playing field as white people, and there was nothing to be redressed. That's not my thought at all. But the idea of when is it ever going to end? It will never end if you don't force it to end, because it's not in their interest of college administrators to make any of this end. Dissecting people into little groups that they can micromanage into the different ways that they do is what they love to do. So I don't see an end to it. I know Kurt did a much more serious analysis than I did, because I just skimmed the case. So I'm interested to hear what he has to say about it. But I didn't see any end in sight from the parties.
Yeah, no, what was the most revealing moment to me during the oral arguments for the debate is they asked them flat out, if you achieve parity, with the population at large, are you done? It's like, if you get to a point where the school demographics perfectly represent American demographics right down the line, are you done? And they wouldn't say yes even there. It's like, we're not going to say yes. They wouldn't admit to any endpoint. And I'm like, well, if perfect parity isn't the endpoint, there's no point in this.
What the hell is perfect parity? And that was another point that Gorsuch brought up, which is, what is perfect parity when there's such arbitrary ways that we've accepted as being the normal way of diversifying ourselves, rather than determining between East Asian students versus Southeastern Asian versus Chinese. Like, what part of is Asian? They decided just call black. What is black? I mean, what does that even mean? Is that Jamaican? Is that, do the ancestors have to come from Africa or East Indies? Like where? It doesn't mean anything. It's so arbitrary that it's ridiculous to try and match our population at large.
That was brought out in the opinion. And the opinion is really good. And I will say, having read this opinion, it was, they spent a whole lot of time just destroying the dissent. And the thing that people don't realize is these appellate judges, these opinions are circulated amongst the justices before they're put out. And so the dissent saw those criticisms. They saw what the majority was going to say, and they could have addressed their arguments. They could have answered it. But they didn't. It's completely silent. And I mean, boy, I'll tell you, because normally if you were if these justices are circulating opinions, the dissenters would look at that and correct, or they would modify, or they would rebut, but they don't. It's a pure ideology. And so therefore those criticisms remain in the majority opinion. And it is powerful. I don't think I remember a case where the majority has quite called out the dissent as effectively and as relentlessly as they did in this case.
Oh no, well, Steve, I don't know. It would be a close call with 303 Creative. I mean, it was like a large portion of the majority opinion was preemptively calling out the stupidity fabrication of fact and law of the dissent. But I think also that everyone has lost track, or not everyone, most people, a lot of people have lost track in this decision. They're defending affirmative action. It was overt discrimination against another minority. It wasn't like it was somehow penalizing only Caucasians, only descendants of slave owners, and only people who I don't know, who have participated to racial inequity in America to the extent that it exists. They were penalizing another protected minority for the benefit of another one. It was as far as an individualized policy, it was absolutely unjustifiable, because it wasn't even based on it wasn't predicated on the original premise of affirmative action. It was just penalizing one ethnic minority for the benefit of another.
Well, the argument, because I made that argument to someone a couple of days ago, and they actually reminded me of something. In Plessy v. Ferguson, one of the arguments in Plessy v. Ferguson was the law back in that time was that, black people couldn't sit in certain train cars, the front train cars versus the back train cars. But if you were Asian, since you weren't black, you could actually sit. And that was one of the arguments that, hey, you could have non-citizens could sit in the front train cars, and black citizens couldn't sit in the front train cars. So that was one of the arguments were like, to compare Asians at the minority as blacks, even though in some instances, even back then, they had rights even as non-citizens that blacks didn't have. Shows it's a difference. But I do agree with you, Viva. I do think it was kind of pick one minority over the other. But that's the response that's out there. Yeah. The fact that Asians did have essentially more rights, even though they were non-citizens, as black people back then.
I want to point out, Steve, what you said just now about how they decimated the dissent. That actually is part, I've noticed, of Gorsuch's style when he's the one who issues the opinion. There was another decision that he gave a couple of years back during the lockdowns. I think it was in the Aguda case, where he was ceaselessly mocking Roberts for his decision. And so, and basically saying, his reliance, that he's completely misreading the Jacobson case. And he said he literally has it backwards. And I actually did a Twitter thread where I was like saying, when you read this, it's amazing to see a justice calling out the dissent that way. And I noticed that both of those decisions happen to be Gorsuch. So if you enjoy a good rip of the dissent, look for a Gorsuch opinion, because
but the internal appellate process that people need to understand is that the dissent allowed those criticisms to go unrebutted. They could have deleted sections. They could have removed the criticisms. They could have addressed them. They see what the majority opinion is going to be way before it ever gets published. So the fact that, and usually that's how opinions get written, is dissents. There's a back and forth within the justices. So to see that amount and the number of powerful criticisms that go unaddressed by the dissent shows you that the dissenters are really operating off ideology and not legal basis and rationality. One of the criticisms was I thought was great in the majority opinion was, look, here's all the cases we're relying on. We're following Supreme Court precedent, going back and forth and making a very thorough analysis. And then it says the dissent doesn't cite to this case, dissent doesn't cite to this case, dissent doesn't cite it. They're basically completely untethered from law, and they're just riffing it. They're just winging it, ideologically imposing what they want to have happen in their minority opinion. So it was very I loved it. I thought it was a great opinion.
Mhm.
Loved Clarence Thomas's dissent, affirmance, concurrence, and the majority opinion was great. It was really well done.
Well, let's move on to another interesting case. Again, we went from the racist Supreme Court, because they were essentially being called racist, to now the bigoted Supreme Court, because now they're bigots. In this recent case, let me share my screen so we can see how it's being
this case
covered in the media.
I don't quite understand how the dissent doesn't quite see how their own rationale eats itself.
So
this is the thing with the 303 creative.
So
It's
this
like
is
companies can be forced to create speech.
So on June 30th, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 in favor of Colorado web designer Lori Smith, who said she had a First Amendment right to refuse to design a wedding website for same-sex couples, even though the state law has a law that prohibits discrimination against gay people. Kurt has been following the story religiously, so I'll let Kurt give us the details of what happened.
Yeah, so there's a woman in Colorado who is a graphic designer and produces custom graphics and custom websites. She had not, up to the point of the lawsuit, gotten into the wedding design business specifically, but she was contemplating getting into the wedding design business, creating websites for weddings. And she was concerned that if she did that, she'd have to create weddings for gay weddings or other weddings that she might not have approved of for religious reasons. So she sued Colorado. She sought declaratory relief. She said, I'm contemplating this. This is a live controversy. If I were to do this, it creates a problem. And the Supreme Court ultimately agrees that, yes, it creates a problem because she's being forced to create speech that she doesn't agree with, because a website is pure speech. This case was a better vehicle for this issue than Masterpiece Cake, because it's pure speech. In Masterpiece Cake, you had the problem where the speech is embedded in a useful article, the cake, because the cake is useful and it can be used for eating and nutrition and all the rest of it, right? So it has this mixed practical and speech aspect. So in Masterpiece Cake, there's a lot of questions in the briefing. It's like, what about people who design flowers? What about people who, make suits for weddings or shoes or for weddings or whatever? What about these other utilitarian articles? The nice thing about 303 Creative is it avoids all those issues for the moment because it's pure speech, right? There's no useful aspect to the website. It's just pure information, right? So it doesn't have utility in that sense. And so where it's just pure speech, you can't be forced to speak what you don't agree with. No compelled speech has been the law essentially forever. And so that seems pretty easy. And what really confuses me about the minority decision is they're like, yes, they should be compelled to make speech because they make a business that's available to the general public. Their business is creation of speech. They can't discriminate. I'm like, but what the minority doesn't seem to appreciate or understand or contemplate is that logic would be instantly used against them, because the law protects, among other things, discrimination on the basis of religion. So if you had a, if there was such a designer, if there was a designer who was really LGBTQ proud and really hated the Christian bigots, and they had a website design business, and that was what they did, the minority's rationale would force such a company to create a website for the Christian church, even though they don't want to, and about how wonderful the church is and all. Force a speechwriter to write a speech about how great the Christian church is. Write a musician to create a song about how great the Christian church is. So they don't seem to contemplate or understand their own rationale would force the people that they presumably like to make speech that they would abhor. And that's the thing that really I don't get.
Hold on, Joe, but before you get in, let Viva jump in, because Viva was trying to.
I was just going to say something. It's another case where you read the dissenting opinion, and it's detached from reality, legal and factual, and the way they were straw manning it, at least in Sotomayor's portion, where they were literally saying, I mean, it was like sucking and blowing. They were saying they're not. It's not speech. They're just denying a website, but they would agree to sell a website so long as it's not a custom website. They were just literally making up their own facts to justify their foregone conclusion that they were going to try to compel this web designer to make specific messages for issues that they didn't believe in the same way they were going to make a cake baker bake a cake, put a message with their own hand in their own mouth and their own head that they didn't believe in.
Viva and I were on a Twitter Spaces talking about this case together, and there was an attorney there from the left who was raving about the brilliance of Sotomayor, and I couldn't even believe it. I was astonished. I was like, really? Like I could, like, he was sincerely like overwhelmed by the brilliance of Sotomayor, who I think is one of the most inept justices I've seen in my lifetime. And the question that I have, and it came up during that Spaces, and you sort of started leaning into it a little bit, Kurt, with the way you described the decision, is I read that decision slightly different from the way you just seem to lean in on it, which is I look at it as purely a free speech issue, completely untethered from freedom of religion. Meaning,
I agree with that. I was just using the religious. It was just an example that came to mind, but it is based on freedom of speech, not freedom of religion. It was just the most extreme example that came up to mind.
Okay, no, that's what I was wondering, if any of you read it as that there's an additional level of free speech that is somehow enabled because of freedom of religion, and that's implied by this decision, or if this is just purely about free speech. It happened to be that this case touched on a religious issue for this individual, but that this is completely
the religious issue is ultimately,
you don't need to have religion behind you to have that
the religious issue is ultimately irrelevant in the case.
Well, I think where people were getting confused is they were saying, well, how about if I like the neo-Nazi cake, and they were saying, well, how about if I refused to put a neo-Nazi message on a website? And then everyone on that Twitter space was like, well, nobody could compel you to do that because it wouldn't be discrimination because you weren't discriminating against anybody. They're not a protected class, was the argument. So people were confounding the protected class on the end of the refusal versus the basis for refusing to do it. My understanding is that it was a free speech issue, a First Amendment, which the Constitution includes a number of other rights. This was a First Amendment free speech issue, where the protected class became relevant was, no neo-Nazi is going to make me make a message and then sue me for discrimination. Whereas in this case, it was a protected class, so they got sued for discrimination. Therefore, that was where it all.
I'm not 100% sure about that neo-Nazi thing, to be quite honest, because
of the creed argument.
Well, no, I can be a little bit more specific than that. In some specific states, they have political as a explicitly listed separate class, and there is the American Nazi Party. They do exist. So the American Nazi Party presumably is a political organization and would be protected under political discrimination, which some places protect explicitly by local law. So the neo-Nazis being able to walk in and demand their Nazi cake.
All right, well, let's go with the
protection. Might
go
be
with
possible.
the puppy. We'll go with the puppy killers. So, like, make a cake that says "kill puppies." I'm not doing it.
I'm not sure what religion is supportive of that, but yeah, your point
maybe
is fine.
Satanists. I don't know.
let me get Southern Law inside here. Southern Law, what's your thoughts on the wonderful website for the LGBT community?
Well, I'm thinking of some of the points that like Kurt had brought up. How ridiculous it is for the dissent on this to not understand that being so against it that they're ignoring the ramifications of their own logic. So, if Greta Thunberg shows up in the U.S. and you can engage her, surprise, Greta, you have to show up at the NASCAR event and announce everybody start your engines. Well, she doesn't want to do that. That's not her brand. If you'll pay the going rate for someone, then they have to put your message out there for you. That is absolutely absurd. Now and one of the things that dissent did to make clear here, some of the things you guys are saying, is the parties to the credit, I think, stipulated to a lot of the facts, pretty much all the material facts. So the dissent just ignored a lot of that and said, but what about this? And that was not even what the other side argued, because they stipulated that it was, for example, a creative endeavor. It wasn't just a technical website with a little bit of code. And they also stipulated that she had no issue working with someone who's, say, gay or whatever. She was not going to deny her website services to those people only if it involved promoting, say, a same-sex wedding that she was against, but not just website stuff in general. So she wasn't even trying to not have these people as customers. She just didn't want to make the speech that she didn't want to make. And ignoring that puts them in this bizarre locution of, well, do I have to write jokes against Jews and stuff if I'm told to? Now, no, you don't. That's the whole point of this ruling. You do not have to do those things. If you're booked as a comedian somewhere, you don't have to listen to the owner say, I want you to say this horrible thing about this group or that group, because you have freedom of speech.
It's pretty funny picturing Greta Thunberg at that NASCAR. That would be like
that was
the Dylan Mulvaney moment for NASCAR right there. It's like,
oh my God,
why don't you just Bud Light NASCAR?
Can we hire Dylan Mulvaney to say anti things?
Yeah, exactly.
Hold on, let me take a second here to pay some of the bills for our boy. It
would be like forcing Dylan Mulvaney to promote Bud Light. They never do that because it's a product they don't believe in.
So Warren Lee sent $220 super chats saying the same thing. So thank you so much. I'm going to read one and I'll show both. How would you even know, right? If you take, it's exactly the same. If you take the best students from the lesser schools and put them with a better school to fail, the lower school cannot grow. And those that could grow and put into a failing situation. That's
terrible. That is penalizing the less intelligent. You'll never. I don't know. I'm trying to think of a way to rebut this. It's like if you go by sports, I guess it's like forcing people who are just different competitive levels to go up into another league because there's an absence of representation. Someone's just going to say that's racist if there are certain statistical unfortunate.
Let's jump on that sports analogy, Viva. That's a good analogy, because what if you took a great college player and because he's some racial category, shoved him right into the NFL, and and then he gets clobbered, and it's like, oh well, But I mean, it's like, well, but we have diversity with the NFL, but the guy got smashed, right? Well, no, but if you want to succeed, you got to follow the natural trajectories of capability.
It's an interesting thing. Who was it? I want to say Jameel Hill. There was a Twitter account who I'm not convinced is not another Emily Marsh type of account, where someone says there's not enough Caucasian representation in the NBA, and then her reply, she happens to be black, so I mean that might, at least the account seems to be. Her reply was, "Do white people not have access to basketballs?" And then I'm reluctant to get into racially charged debates on Twitter. Someone else replied what I would have replied: are black students actually being denied access to schools, or are they not being represented in sufficient statistics in terms of admissions to Harvard? Because those are two very different things. But Twitter is not the place for nuanced debate. But I guess in as much as white people are not denied access to basketballs, and there is a certain statistical representation in certain sports, decipher from it what you will. I don't think the argument was ever that blacks in America are not provided access to universities. The argument is, well, they're not sufficiently represented in Harvard per se, or certain schools, so we need affirmative action there.
Well, there's a case. I believe that Law and Order did a spin on this, but it was affirmative action case in which a guy he was like the best high schooler in his neighborhood. It happened to be in a poor black neighborhood, best high schooler, and he got into probably a really great school. So they started, so they fundraised so he can get some money to go to school. And when he got there, he was failing. a lot of his classes, except for like he was really good in science. So he was doing great in science, but like all these other classes. And they went and they asked, like, what, this is one of the best kids from the school. He's the valedictorian. Why is he failing when he gets here? And they said, well, the problem is that at his high school, they didn't, some of his books had Eisenhower as the president. Some of the teachers just checked out. So he was the best in that particular school, but he was so far below just understanding just the regular stuff that he couldn't succeed. And so there was like a whole thing about him assaulting the people because they eventually was failing out. So it became like a thing. But it's interesting because I know that happened even when I was in law school. I remember there were some kids there who just went to these schools, and even though they may have been the top dog in the school they went to, when you come to law school, it's a totally different game. And
But
study habits and things like that matter. And those students just didn't. I'm not saying they didn't understand it, but they just didn't have those tools to help them be successful.
Well, the issue, the easy solution is to make, if you want to make criteria, make it based on economic status, because you will never change your race, but you may become poor. And so this is the thing. It's like, that means it's open. If we're trying to help the disadvantaged, my child is not as disadvantaged when compared to, say, Michael Jordan's child, right? He's got a lot more money than we do. So it's like, but the thing is that if we want to, let's be fair, we want to have people who are smart not be denied a slot, then let's make it based on an economic model. If we're saying this is, but instead it's this racial division. These people want to force on racial divisions and divide people by race. It's evil and it's unconstitutional. I'm glad the Supreme Court finally realized it.
To steelman the argument, the other argument was that the legacy medias are prejudice and bias, as if to say the alternative is between affirmative action and preserving legacy admissions. I think everybody has an issue with legacy admissions, and affirmative action, like Robert and I discussed it last Sunday. He presented a very compelling argument that affirmative action did nothing but actually enhance and empower legacy admissions, because it sort of gave the moral justification now for it. But the argument to critique this decision is not that legacy admissions are bad and now therefore being justified. Legacy admissions, bad. We all agree with that. Affirmative action wasn't doing anything to resolve that problem. It was just adding another problem.
Amen to that. Kurt, this person says Texas House Bill 2127, of which I, by coincidence, have a video about. Do you have a constitutional opinion on it?
Yeah, so I'll try to summarize the issue. Texas passed a law that attempts to take away power from localities to pass certain local laws and certain local regulations. This was responsive to an Austin city ordinance which required roofing companies or housing companies to give some sort of mandatory water break at certain intervals. I forget the exact details, but they passed some law, and Texas said effectively no locality can pass any kind of law like this. This is strictly a matter for state law. The Texas Constitution, by its nature, recognizes the power of localities to pass law. This is summarizing, obviously. Pass laws that are not in conflict with state law. So state law can preempt, as we say. They can pass rules, and if those rules are in conflict, the local law fails. This is a little bit different because Texas hasn't passed a law saying, here are the break requirements and they're uniform. They've passed a law saying no locality can pass a local ordinance. So it's a little bit different. So is that constitutional under Texas's law? The answer is, I don't know. It's an interesting idea about it. Not all states give localities power. Virginia, where I grew up, or where I went to spent most of my time as a lawyer, Virginia is what's called a Dillon rule state. So localities have no power but what the state explicitly provides. So Texas it's basically their way around. Localities have power except what the state takes back.
And just to be clear, when you say constitution, you're talking about state constitution.
The state constitution of Virginia. Yeah. And the state constitution of Texas. So that was a very complicated question. I hope I did it justice.
You did. I'm going to check it out too, because I'm in Texas and I know Houston is suing the state because of that law. So it's interesting. Warren Lee for $5 says, let's be honest, the U.S. political sphere, Asians do not have enough plurality. That plurality? Yeah, right word. To be a significant minority. those ignore them. No, I don't know. I it's interesting. I think when it comes to being a minority, I think and this is my political me. The left uses minorities as political pawns, and it's identity politics, right? So if I can't use you to advance my political aspirations, it's like, and Asians kind of buck that trend, right? Because it's always, from my perspective, I want to make sure this is, I speak for nobody else on the panel. This is my perspective. When the Democrats come, they say, we need the government to take care of you. We need the government to give you more money. We need the government to help you get into college. You don't have to do it. You've already been screwed by the government. We want the government to do everything. It's all pro-government. Government is going to help us do this, and white people are evil. But when it comes to Asians, they're already doing it. They're already going to the best schools. They're already going and building. They're coming with nothing and building the American dream. So they don't really help that narrative that I think wants to be pushed on the left. That's why I think they're excluded, unless like, for instance, when it came to when they were being assaulted in record numbers, that was when you saw the left big, it's Asian assaults, it's evil, it's Trump, it's evil Trump. But then it came to light that most of those assaults were happening by black people, and then guess what? You stop hearing about it, even though they're still going on. But that's my take on it. The Southern law. What do you think about this issue?
Well, I think this goes along with the point you're saying. If your goal is to set in a ivory tower, being overpaid, pull up a spreadsheet, put everybody in there based on their color, and you have too many Asians getting in as compared to their representation of the overall population, if they're 5%, but there's 10% of them there, then you've got to whittle that down, right? Because your goal is everybody should be in everything at the exact proportion they are in society by color. So you take the Asians down and they lose proportionally worse than, say, white people do on admissions, at least from a percentage basis. And then when they complain, you simply lump them in as white supremacists, which is what the news is now. That anybody who goes against anything the left have to say, because now, I don't know these organizations of white supremacy, but they seem to be the most diverse organization out there right now because they have Hispanics in it. It has not just white people, everyone's welcome in a white supremacy group, apparently. Black people, Asians, everybody's in it.
Jews as well.
Yeah. So anybody who doesn't go along with the left is part of that group, and that's how they treat Asians. And it's kind of my thing there about it's not whether there's a group on top, it's just which group. And they cannot allow the Asians to succeed on the basis of their merits because it conflicts with their goal of just apportioning out rewards based on race, which is disgusting.
But you also appreciate the irony. It was barely, 60, 70 years ago, they were locking up Japanese Americans. And so you're talking about, in modern times, penalizing at least the broader demographic of an ethnic group that has been discriminated against in the United States. And you're justifying it again in the name. It's all so bloody insulting. In the name of giving a leg up to a demographic that you are implicitly suggesting, if not outright stating, like Erica Marsh, that parody account said, will never be able to succeed in a merit-based system on their own. It's fundamentally racist, but I think everybody pretty much appreciates that by this point in time.
For a lot of government forms, Asians are white. That's true.
Remove those boxes entirely.
Viva, I'm saying, Viva, I'm saying if you steal the best students, the lower schools will have lower competition. All right. You will stunt the growth of the school and the good students. So thank you for the super chats, guys. I really appreciate it. Great panel as always. Frei Zachariah Anderson.
Frei Zachariah Anderson. That's the it's out. His brother. I mean, for anybody who doesn't know what's going on, Joe, you interviewed Solomon. Yeah. I had him on. Everybody should go watch that story. But Solomon is running a righteous crusade now to try to liberate his brother, who arguably but not arguably had a sham.
He's a very well-spoken white person.
Wow.
So. But he happens. I said that because he happens to be very well spoken in the way he presents the arguments. So,
well, one thing I did find very interesting is the way the news was covering the case that we were talking about before we went to super chats, the one about the website.
Pretty creative.
So here is CNN. Supreme Court limits LGBTQ protections in ruling.
Oh yeah.
And it's so interesting, the framing of these arguments, because a lot of times people will go and read the newspaper headlines and don't read past it and see, oh, they're like they're taking rights away from LGBTQ. Steve
Let me
Gosney,
ask Kurt,
is that
because
true?
I know
Kurt's
it's hoping for too much, but you would hope an organization like CNN, which is its entire business is based on freedom of speech, would be somewhat sensitive to protection of said freedom of speech, but apparently not.
Well, do LGBTQ people is their speech also protected in this decision?
It is,
Yes.
amazingly enough. Yes.
What do you
it is.
know?
They
Amazing.
also get to choose. They also get to choose which speech they give or not to which speakers.
I was going to say,
Amazing.
go to a 2S LGBTQIA plus business and make them bake you a cake that says puberty blockers are genital mutilation. See how far that goes.
Well,
We just got demonetized.
Well, listen, it's interesting because we've been talking about the Supreme Court cases and how they've essentially changed American society, and I think a lot of this stuff, to be fair, is for the good. I definitely agree with Roe v. Wade. It's funny because when I tell people, what's her name, RBG or Ruth Bader Ginsburg, had issues with Roe v. Wade. She's said it multiple times. Mm-hmm. Roe v. Wade is a bad opinion. I'm sorry, it just is a bad opinion. People still say I'm the misogynist, but unfortunately, it is what it is.
Dude,
but
sorry. Go
ahead.
I was going to say the media coverage. I mean, they're not informative. They are misinformative, disinformative propagandists. And you just watch. I don't know if it's on our menu for the day. Watch the way they're talking about I was going to say Hunter Biden cocaine. We don't know whose cocaine it is. You might never know.
Anybody. Could be anyone.
But I mean, I just
wink.
I just tweeted somebody on Twitter, Yashir Ali, who you know who he is. He's a massive following. Just let me see. Huffington Post, New York Mag, literally just tweeted out, "Who cares if there was some coke at the White House? My God, small G." You want to hell? It was a small bag. People are acting like they discovered Hunter digging an El Chapo tunnel and Jill Biden was hauling in kilos. It was some coke found in the White House. If some coke was found in the Trump White House, I wouldn't care either. Liar.
That's a liar.
Sorry. And then he says enough. And I want to start something. I want to start a trend. The reply to a response that is so partisan it borders on insanity. It's going to be hashtag OK Emily. Because Emily Marsh, that account that came out after the Harvard decision and said blacks are never going to be able to succeed on their own merit in a merit-based system. And I was like, that is so wildly stupid. It has to be parody. That was the only one that really pushed me over the edge, and it turned out to be. So any tweet that is so stupid, it's indistinguishable from parody. Okay, Emily.
Is it the best and maybe only defense that this wasn't Hunter Biden's is that the bag of cocaine still had some cocaine in it?
No, but Barnes brought up another good point. Like, who gets into the White House without a body search? I mean, there are very few people that get into the White House without being physically searched.
This is a good point because we've seen even the president take the lead on this sniffing kids and stuff to make sure they're not sneaking anything in the White House. So,
geez, Southern law is on fire today.
Ooh, well, now that you pointed out, are we sure we know what the president was smelling for? Maybe he's trained himself to smell for cocaine because he wants to know where the sources are.
I like to
turn himself into a drug dog.
I was going to make a bad joke, but that would be beyond my threshold for the internet.
Well, listen, so I do want to move on to something that Joe has covered. Joe Good Logic. So Joe Good Logic he's the reason why I even know that this even exists. This Stitch and Adam, they're a comedy peer who are mid-conservative, but they're really
Stitch and Adam. They're not mid-conservative. They're not. They're real centrist. They even call
they're centrist.
They call
I
themselves
know,
centrist.
but I'm saying what essentially that's the criticism now. They're actually they call them right-wing nuts, but they're not. They're as centrist as I am. But Anna Kasparian from the Young Turks. There's been a huge fallout at the Young Turks. Some of the Young Turks, like for instance, they agree with the affirmative action rule, and they said it was, affirmative action essentially is reverse racism and things of that nature.
Didn't Cenk Uygur say that he agreed with it?
Yes.
Yeah.
So they're not ideologically poor, but I'm going to play you a clip from that episode in which she essentially admits to the fact that the media and that she was watching mainstream media, and the media omits facts that we need to know, and she was fooled, and she apologized for Rittenhouse. Like, she really goes through and apologizes for Rittenhouse and all this other stuff. So I think I want to play with you this clip about how they now see the media in this space and why she's now essentially going from far left progressive to essentially a moderate Democrat.
About like, independent lefty outlets. I'm talking about like legacy media outlets, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of them, it's not that they report misinformation, it's that they omit details of the story that would, maybe the additional details of the story don't change your mind at all, right? But it's not up to them to decide that. Like, we should know every detail. I think the Amy Cooper story is another example. It was fairly recently I came across Camille Foster's very in-depth investigation into that story, and there were so many details of that story that were intentionally omitted or left out of the legacy media reporting of it, and that painted a picture in my mind and in the minds of many others that there's no justification for the way that she was panicking when she was on the phone with the 911 dispatcher, right? But then you get this, then you find out, based on what Camille Foster had found out and reported, was that like she didn't have good cell reception. So the person on the other end of that conversation couldn't hear her. She was panicking because she genuinely thought that she was at risk after, here's another thing that was omitted in a lot of the reports, after she was literally threatened by the bird watcher, right? Who said, if you're going to do what you want, I'm going to do what I want, and you're not going to like it. And then he proceeds to try to lure her dog to him. And listen, you might still feel that her behavior was uncalled for, whatever. That's up to you. But you should know all those details. And I will say, from my personal opinion, if I'm alone at a park and some random guy tries to lure my dog away from me, I'm gonna freak out. I just am. And so, okay.
So, what do you think? Do you think she's right? Do you think the media
pretty based? Pretty based.
They're calling her right wing. They say she should put a Trump hat on now. That's just sad.
They've been joking that she's about to join the Daily Wire. She's gotten a lot of
give it 3
flack
months
for this, and I actually, when I covered this and I went through the entire video on my show, I went through the entire interview earlier this week on one of my live streams. I created a short out of this, and apparently my shorts are too obscene for YouTube, because literally I was saying that I believed that was something she said that made me believe this was not a grift, which a lot of people question and say, maybe she's doing this for attention, to be a little controversial, build some hype around the show, which has been a little bit stagnant for a while now. And what made me think that these changes in her mindset are legitimate, and I put this in a short, which YouTube said was not advertiser friendly. You know what I said in this short? I said the fact that she's feeling this way, that she said she feels happier than she's ever felt in her life, because and the reason she feels happier is because it's difficult to think that you live in a world that tens of millions of people in your country are bigots. And when you start to actually listen to them and recognize that it's not bigotry, but they actually have a perspective rooted in what's a healthy way for us to move forward, absent bigotry, it's like you're much happier. That it's like, because imagine what that would be like to live with, in a country that you feel is genuinely filled with Nazis. You would be angry and miserable and screaming, and she feels like a weight has been lifted off her shoulder. And what I pointed out was, if this was all a grift and she didn't really mean it, I don't think she would realize that outgrowth would be that she would feel happiness. I think she would feel that all she would feel is the difficulty of her fans yelling at her and not recognize the internal happiness that she would have. So the fact that she's publicly stating that she feels this happiness, which is not something I think she would have predicted 2 years ago that would happen, that she's actually feeling it. That's what tells me that I think there's at least some level of legitimacy to what she's saying here, that she actually is changing her mindset somewhat.
Well, first of all, there's some degree of legitimacy, because what she's saying now is right. What she said then was wrong, partisan disinformation. I don't throw the word grift around. I freaking hate the word. It's abused and misused. I don't think it's a grift. I think she might be very well sincere about this. The issue is, it's all nice and fun to become sincere about the vitriol and the dangers of the side you've been on for the last 5 years when they come for your when they come for your rights. I was going to make a joke and make a vagina joke, but like one of her revelations was about them coming for women and womanhood, and referring to the vagina as a bonus hole. And then she takes offense to that, and then the trans community,
birthing persons bothered her a lot.
No, that she's like, but so then when she comes out and says that, then they turn on her, and now she realizes that she's been on the wrong side the whole time. It's only when you only respond when the injustice is at your front door. Okay, you're late. It's almost a little disingenuous, and it causes me to be suspicious of how you'll react in the future, because when you've been so wrong for so long on so many issues, and you only realize how wrong you were when they come for you, well, I can forgive you, but I'll never trust you again.
That's fair. However, to throw back the other way, a lot of people, when they're in her position, when they see the hate that they're getting, will issue an apology.
Yeah.
We've seen so many people on the left say, like, I rethought it.
Yeah, but she might have learned that lesson, where the apology is just going to get you in more trouble anyhow, because she always understood they don't accept apologies on that side, because they just want you to apologize so they can weaponize it against you. She knows that, so she might just be playing by the rules that she knows are the rules.
We know that. We've seen countless people issue apologies and be welcomed back into the fold. So
let me get Steve Gosney in here. Steve, seemed like you had a point you wanted to make.
No, I was just agreeing with Viva. He was right on. That was exactly. I have nothing to add. That was. But
so if you both think that she's motivated purely by this, and that makes it temporary, I'll just point this out. Jimmy Kimmel issued his apology. When you're on the left and you issue an apology, you actually get accepted back. It's when you're not firmly on the left and you issue an apology that they say, "Aha, we always knew it, and now we've got you." So I don't even know if that's really true. Like we've seen so many people issue apologies that are, if they're constantly on the left and then they have a step out of line and they apologize for it, I think they do get taken back. It's just, if you're not that deep on the left, they're not going to welcome you back.
Well, I have to agree with Joe. Two things. I want to show you exactly what she says changed her whole perspective, because there was an event that happened that changed her whole perspective. And I have it queued up, but I tend to agree with Joe, because I was the loony lefty. I believed all that stuff because I only had legacy media. Ask Viva when he first met me. I was extremely left wing, but the difference and the thing that blew me up was the thing is, I said, let me just research the stories myself. And when I started researching the stories, Breonna Taylor was the first story I actually did. I saw how much misinformation that ABC News, this was 6:30 ABC News on Channel 7 that goes out to everybody. They had misinformation in that video. And when I exposed that misinformation, some people, and I was like, wow, the media just straight up lies to you. And so I do agree. Sometimes you have that moment when you wake up and you say, you know what I've been being told is BS. But then on the back end, it's like, but then you have to, like for me personally, I feel like she's going through the journey I went through 6-7 years ago.
Except here's a problem that's kind of innate in all the legacy media outlets, and that is that they have a format that is soundbite driven and therefore narrative driven, that feeds its people that are already true believers, and its little things is like, and they emit information that's inconvenient, and it reaffirms what you already think, right? Yeah. Whereas I don't even watch any of that legacy media anymore. I watch people who I know, who are individuals, who are free thinkers, who are honest, and who can speak in a long form like this, like Rumble and these sort of outlets, where I can talk, I can explain. It might take me 15 minutes to get to a point, but I'm making a point that's at least, I've got some basis when we can dialogue with the chat, we can dialogue with each other, and we can talk. You get these other meetings, like I got 3 minutes to say what I got to say. And so it's soundbite. I don't even want, that's useless information. It's just clutter.
So let me do this. Let me first get this $100 super chat. Little Rock, haven't seen you around a little while. Thank God you're back. Love to see you. Little Rock says, I was going to give this on Rumble so you would get 100%, but could not find. Just wanted to say hi, and hi to all the great attorneys.
So hey, Eric is now getting money even though he's not here. So that's good.
He's doing much better than he normally does. He should stay away a lot more.
Oh my God.
This is all part of Eric's secret plan to make us farm content, and he just sits back on the beach. I see what's happening.
So all right. So this is the last clip I'm gonna play from this, but this is why Anna Kasparian is now turning, I don't want to say right wing, but a lot closer to the center. Here it is.
So, during the pandemic, there was absolutely a crime wave in the country, mostly in like major cities. Los Angeles happened to be one of them. And, you know, I talked about how I, you know, was assaulted. Well, actually, let me give you the details again, because there's an element to that story that I've never shared with anyone that also explains where my head's at now. So, you know, as I was walking my dog one day, there were these two guys. They appeared to be homeless. They appeared to be on something. They looked like they might be methed out or something because they were kind of acting erratically. But, you know, typically when I come across guys like that, if I ignore them, they won't do anything.
Right.
That wasn't the case this time around. You know, they're coming toward me, and my dog, Charlie, like, he does his business. And as I bend over to pick up his business, one of them grabs me by my hips and just, like, with an erection and everything, just starts like humping me, like
Wow.
right there in like broad daylight. And
Right.
it was terrifying because, like, I didn't have any weapon with me, no taser, no pepper spray, nothing.
Mhm.
And
Wow.
and luckily the guy, he did that, and then he walked away while they're like laughing at me. And if I felt so degraded, scared. And like the
Right.
first thing I did is I called my husband, and he came down and he's like, "Where are they?" And he started looking for them. We couldn't find them. The cops wouldn't come. Like, we actually had an incident in front of our building like a few weeks prior to that. That was really scary. We called the police, and the police just wouldn't come. Like, it was amazing. And now in
Wow.
retrospect, I realized the reason why is because there was a shortage. And I think that there was like an unofficial strike, considering what happened in 2020 and all the protests. So they just wouldn't show up. And I just didn't even think to call the cops, because I'm like, what's the point? These guys have already like left, and they're not going to be able to find them. But anyway, I opened up about that. And I also started opening up about, you know, just what the statistics were indicating in regard to crime, and how it's obviously having a negative impact on all communities, but mostly the communities that like BLM and leftists claim to care so much about, the disadvantaged communities. You know, crime on the metro system in LA has been unbelievable. And the majority of people who take the metro, who take buses and public transportation, they're usually like immigrant workers. They're usually, you know, blue collar workers who, you know, don't have enough money to buy a car, for instance. And so I was like, why are you guys cool with just having these people deal with this kind of violence? There was like a phase last year where people were literally being set on fire randomly on
Wow.
buses. And that would get no attention, no news coverage, and it would infuriate me. And so when I opened up about what happened to me in my own neighborhood, what I thought was telling was how everyone, not everyone, but some people accuse me of pushing racist stereotypes. But I had never, ever disclosed the race of these two individuals, ever.
Yeah.
But they just assumed that these two guys were Black. They weren't
Wow.
Black. They were two white guys. But like, I never shared that publicly because I didn't think the race really mattered.
So,
Well, I got
See,
two.
she tricked them. She tricked
Yes.
them, because normally when you leave the race out, it is because they're Black.
I was
Go
just
ahead.
trying to go through her Twitter feed or to see how she reported on Daniel
Daniel
Penny.
yeah.
Like I said, it's nice. She realized that Democrat policy is bad when she gets sexually assaulted. She realizes that Democrats are racist when she tries to share. I'm not saying like Democrat. I'm not sweeping
Yeah,
generalizations,
we
but
get it.
so it's nice. She only realizes this when they come for her, and it's fine. And it's a good time to wake up. But it doesn't question motives. It just questions judgment. And it's not a question of holding a grudge over her head. And it's also not a question of not being forgiving because, you know, like when Jimmy Dore got excommunicated, when Russell Brand got excommunicated, the right, the conservative, or the, you know, the red-pilled side was lucky to have them. But they were not excommunicated for quite the same reasons. And I don't think they were quite as vitriolic in their judgment against the people that they now realize were not all wrong. That said, I'd also like to know what she thinks about Trump. Probably still vitriolic against Trump, not understanding if everything she's been told was a lie, everything she was told was a lie, and she's going to nitpick what she wants to believe was a lie versus what she wants to continue believing is the truth.
You know, you're expressing what a lot of people in the chat are expressing, which I assume is a reflection of what a lot of people are thinking, which is this distrust. And they may be interpreting what I'm saying as saying, like, because I think she's being legitimate, that now that means I trust Anna, all hail Anna. No, that's not at all what I'm saying. What I am saying is this. I think that when people start getting red pilled, it's a process. And I think that she is seemingly starting to go through that process. And I think that it's a positive thing to be welcoming to people who are going through that red pill process, not as far as expecting them that, hey, in the future, I'll be able to rely on them. Not that I'm forming some sort of contractual relationship with her. Not that I look at her as some spokesperson for me. No, of course not. I don't think she'll ever be that. I don't think I'll ever get to that. But to the extent that she starts changing she is influential and she does have a bit of a following, and she can start changing the narrative from the current discussion now, which is no discussion, had no discussion because the other side is racist, to, hey, maybe we should start opening up dialogue. I think that could potentially lead, if others follow her example, that could potentially lead to a healthier America and a better society.
Uncivil, what do you think about this?
I think there's a good principle which sometimes people don't follow, which is you shouldn't punish people when they do the right thing. And you might be like, well, that's obvious. But in a lot of times like this, when someone says something like that we like, there's a tendency of people to point out all the things we didn't like, or to chastise her, or to, make fun of her or mock her, or to, point out the problems. It's like, no, you're saying the right thing. Congratulations, welcome. I'm glad you're saying the right thing, and I hope that this is part of a journey of exploration. So I think Joe is right that this may very well be part of a process, and we should be happy that she is saying the things that are right and encourage the things that are right, so that she'll want to say more of the right things. That she'll be welcomed, when she says things that are correct. And, I do applaud her on a level because she has a lot of vested interests here. She has a lot of money and reputation
and
built up in a certain...
And 15 years believing in this and spitting this for 15 years. You don't change like that overnight. Please continue. I just wanted to.
It's not easy to abandon that. It's not easy for anyone to abandon that. If you get sunk in deep enough to realize that you've been wrong and have to, maybe give it all up because you realize you've been wrong, there's a real strong incentive for a lot of people to just keep ignoring the unpleasant voices in the back of their head.
Not to be too cynical, but knowing what is happening to legacy media and seeing how Tucker Carlson can survive and thrive off of Fox News, I don't know how the Young Turks are doing. They might not be doing too well. So it might be the gambit. All that said, I wouldn't attack her intentions anyhow. But and it's not to say punish her for doing the right thing or not even to forgive her. I just say trust is sort of like a hole that has been dug, and the deeper you've dug the hole of distrust, the longer it takes you, to shovel your way out of it. And so
I appreciate not adopting her wholesale and be like, yes, she is the arbiter of truth. Everything she says is reliable, and being cautious. But I'll be cautiously welcoming.
That's and Kurt's making that's an interesting point, because I was rattling around in my head about how to come at this issue, and it's like, well, do I not accept her journey into the red pill move, or whatever, which side it is, black pill, red pill? And do we not accept that? And that's a very good point, that we should encourage or at least not punish somebody who does that. On the other hand, the other way I think about this is, yeah, but what about all of these folks out there who have been conservative from the start and been on the right side and been correct for so long? It's like, why does she get this special privileged position in the legacy media where they're making money and they're in the favor and everything? So she's so wonderful. It's like, well, at some point you've lost your credibility. And to me, I try to listen and remember what people say. And if they lie to me enough, like a Dan Rather, to me, why has he still got a job? Why is anybody listening to him when he's so wrong for so long? So there's a balance here, and
Dan Rather has no. You know what you're describing is penance, essentially. And does that mean that she's repented? And I don't mean this to. I don't want to make this a religious conversation, but I think by analogy, it's a form of penance. And should we alienate people who seem like they're on a road towards penance?
Who in the chat? Someone just said in the chat, Young Turks has always been CIA. If you really want to get cynical and skeptical, if the Young Turks has always been infiltrated by intelligence in terms of messaging, and now they see, well, we got to have an ally on the other side now. Anna, have the turn, go infiltrate. I'm joking.
Viva, there's another super chat up there about Viva being his red pill.
I'm about to.
Yes,
read
but
these
I'll tell you,
super chats.
I had a red pill, but
No, not that one. The next
well,
one.
no,
the
I'm
ginger,
reading through it.
right?
I've had my come around. I mean, I've had my revelation on COVID as well. But even in the days where I was like, okay, 2 weeks to flatten the curve, I was never saying shut up and take the jab.
You were much
No,
more
but
middle.
I respect. It's when you are hyper judgmental, but wrong. I might have been slow.
That's true. You were never Anna. You were never
See,
Anna. You were never Anna.
But one thing I will say is because I take it from a different position. I don't really just say the right is right and left is wrong. I think both sides are crap, and both sides push horrible misinformation and disinformation. The same thing I can say about the Young Turks is the same thing I can say about Fox News, who just paid almost $1 billion for pushing fake news. So I think there's no sacred cow in this. But what I do think though is facts matter. And what got Anna and the Young Turks in trouble is that facts didn't matter. With Rittenhouse, she in that interview, she talks about Rittenhouse, where there were the facts and they were pushing lies, straight up lies. And when she knew about the facts, she was afraid to go tell her audience the facts because now they're going to turn against her because they had bought into the lies they had already told. So that's what it is. So I think the thing all of us creators on YouTube have to struggle with sometimes is that I got to give you the facts and be damned. And there's been so many times where I've put out videos of people like, oh, your audience is not going to like it because they're not going to like these facts. But I've never had an issue because as long as it's facts and I can say this is where the source comes from and it's good, then you just don't have an issue. I think the left has more of an issue with facts because they call facts racist. I think the right. They may not like the facts, but they won't deal with it.
You just made a point there because you were saying, well, both sides, it's like everybody does it, so it's okay. That's always the fallback of the left that I disagree with. You have to ground your opinions in truth.
Yes.
Now, on the other hand, I will say that the right also has its narrative creating media sources that are soundbite driven and are polarizing. But basically, when we're criticizing people like this Anna, who I don't even know who that is, but to me, there's a problem, like you said, with facts. First let's deal with the truth and let's have a groundwork of truth and deal from a truth and not just a soundbite narrative driven delete the facts that are inconvenient for me kind of perspective, which I think goes on a lot more with the left because they have control of all these bullhorns.
Yeah. I think they definitely have the platform and legacy media lies.
Yeah, Anna didn't seem to recognize that during that interview. She complained. I think it was the same interview. She was complaining about how the right wing has all the control of all the media outlets.
Yeah, that's just
Rumble
that's
and
true.
so forth and so on. It's like the left doesn't have any power in media. I'm like,
Yeah.
what?
They're trying to push that now, which I think is ridiculous. Let me read these super chats. Viva saying it's racist to admit blacks have lower SAT scores. I don't believe Viva.
I will rely on trusted statistics and then maybe entertain the arguments that these tests are. I'll entertain it. I mean, I think those tests are stupid. I didn't do well on my LSATs. I think they're stupid tests. Or my SATs.
I will say this though. There's a gap between because I actually when I was at the law school, we were doing admissions, and one thing they do tell you is that there is a statistical gap between for each race with standardized tests. And that gap isn't just for the LSAT, it's for the SATs, it's for all standardized tests, and there's a gap. And when they actually tried to investigate this gap in scores, they also took into account socioeconomic status. And what they saw is that even predominant when you get up to rich blacks versus rich whites, there was still this gap. They don't know why this gap, and this is one of the biggest things in academics now. And even with the LSAT,
did they do a breakdown within the black community? Like, I mean, Ethiopian blacks versus. I mean, I'm not trying to. I would ask that question as to whether or not there's other sub breakdowns which might. I don't know, make it make sense.
This was one that they did. This is one. If you guys just go to if you go to University of Virginia, just put it in a Google in a search for on YouTube. University of Virginia dean speaks about race and admissions in law school, and he actually breaks it down how they did these studies and what these studies were about. And you can actually look up the studies too, and it's fascinating because that's like the big issue. And another piece of it, there were actual questions on these exams because what they do is they in like say for the LSAT, they give you like 5 parts to it, but one of those parts is an experimental part where they're testing new questions, and they found that some of those questions black people do better on than white people. But so they're trying to now tease out these questions, to take out certain questions, like why do black people do better in these questions versus these questions? It's a fascinating study, but it's all broken down by race. But they're talking about there's a lot to it. But if you can find the reason why that gap exists, then you're going to win a Nobel Prize.
The other thing about these testing scores, and I'm not going to disagree with any statistics that are accurate. A lot of these tests also are skills in and of themselves, and so there might be other ways to understand those statistics in terms of who gets to practice for those tests, who gets to take the Kaplan SAT prep courses. So there could be 1,000 other ways, but ultimately, at the end of the day, I know people who got 90 some odd % on their bar exam. They were incompetent, defective lawyers, and I know some who squeaked by the skin of their teeth, who were very competent lawyers.
Yeah, I know one of the best lawyers I know who failed the bar 7 times.
Oh God, that's gotta hurt.
Failed the bar 7 times. Yeah, but it's one of the best
trial
lawyers.
Give you 5.
But one of the best trial lawyers right now in the city. It's in New York. It's crazy. The guy,
Ron Fischetti was my advanced attorney advocacy, trial advocacy lecturer, and he was like this he taught the class in Fordham, and the first day that he was there, he proudly came in and because he's standing there in front of Fordham, which is a pretty good school, and he said, in case you're wondering what my stature is and why I deserve to be standing here teaching you fine students, is because I can proudly tell you that I graduated in the top 10% of the bottom third of my class at St. John's. And he was a brilliant trial attorney, a phenomenal, like one of the top in the country. And he defended Adna Luima. He did some massive cases, and the point that he was teaching us was that it's not how book smart you are when it comes to being an effective trial attorney. It really isn't. A lot of it is, there's a lot of other factors that go into that into being a phenomenal attorney, and you don't have to be someone who's top of your class to be really good at it.
Let me run through these super chats. There's enough there's not enough gingers in NBA. Larry Bird wasn't enough. I demand affirmative action.
Larry Bird was the boss.
Yeah, he was pretty good. I still think Jackson Brown's Lawyers in Love should be the theme song and playing softly in the background. Is that Jackson? I'm not sure. Lawyers in Love, Jackson Brown's. I don't know the reference. I still think he's implying a poison threat much more than trying to steal the dog. This was about the Amy Cooper dog story that he was saying, come, let me get your dog. Let me get your dog.
Yeah.
I've been watching Viva long enough to watch him get red pilled. He was never an Anna, but it was even still a process.
Oh. Well, no, because
going to be a bit.
No, he is bloody. You're bloody red now. You were not. You were not. You're a different human being today.
Bordering on the black. I have not yet gotten to the black pill, but
love Joe defending Stitch and Adam centrism. You all are great at approaching a different position and ideology with an understanding not afforded to you. Great work, Viva. Do a Depo breakdown again. When are you going to do it, Viva?
Wait, hold on one second.
A deposition breakdown?
Oh, I thought it was a Johnny Depp breakdown. If we get a good one, if there's an interesting one, I'll definitely chime in with my human reading capabilities. which there's no part on the bar exam for that.
Catching up, but I did love the grifter ever grift the grift. Saying, I have the term grifter.
I hate the term.
I hate the term grifter.
It's so abused. They just call anybody who expects to try to make a living off their work a grifter.
And check the private chat, Nate.
Hold on, I didn't do that.
Chat. All right, boom. Yeah, all right, so I'm going to pull this up. All right, in 1 second, and Steve says, I'm not going to read that. What am I doing? I'm reading it out loud.
For merely 99 cents a day, you can support an uncivil law. In the arms of a...
All right.
Please hit that beautiful join button on my channel. We got
two more stories to cover. We're going to cover the one that Joe put in. I'm going to do that right next, but I have one more story that I thought would be interesting, because I like to spread out our stories a little bit. So this story is an interesting story that happened yesterday. Britney Spears allegedly assaulted an NBA player.
No, that Britney Spears was assaulted by the bodyguard.
No. Well, first she assaulted him, and then the bodyguard assaulted her, stopping her from assaulting him. It's a weird story. Let me put it on the screen.
Wow.
All right. So allegedly, Britney Spears saw the number 1 draft pick in the NBA draft. His name is Victor. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name. But anyway, he was walking through a hotel. She saw him earlier, and she wanted to say hi. And allegedly, she said, congratulate him on all his success. So he's walking through, and you can see they actually have pictures from TMZ of him walking. She was there too. And he's actually walking through this is him. He's 7'5". So he's walking through the lobby. She goes up, and now he says she grabs him from the back, because if he stops, there's a crowd that'll come back. So when they're trying to go, the security's like, keep moving. She allegedly grabs him. Security doesn't know that she's Britney Spears, so they jump in front, and get him out of the way. She now says that she deserves an apology because she just tapped him on the shoulder and security overreacted, and she's a woman, and blah, 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 blah. And he's standing behind the security saying, hey, they were trying to get to their way. When somebody grabbed him, they got in a fight. So now we're talking about, is this an assault? Did she assault him? Did the security guard, did they assault her? Was there stopping her from continuing to grab him? Was that justified? Where do we stand on the legal implications of this story?
Can't you just leave Britney alone?
She's the one making a big deal out of it. As Viva said, she's making a big deal out of it. Well, the first interaction when she grabbed him, allegedly, was the security guard's reaction, was it an overreaction?
Probably not.
Depends.
I mean,
Probably
you have
not.
to see it. We have to see it. We really have to see it. I mean, without seeing video of it, it's hard to really, if he probably didn't recognize who it was. And even if it was Britney Spears, I mean, his role is to protect him from anyone getting too close. I mean, so we don't know how close in time everything happened. Like if it was 5 seconds later, that's a really long time rather than like instantaneous.
Yeah.
So, that it's a little difficult to judge without seeing it, I think.
Yeah, but if the story, essentially, if the story is what it is, there's a little leeway here that because she wasn't hurt, but she said she was hit in the face because security was, was trying to move. So you're right, without seeing the video, but he seems to be standing behind his team, and she's playing the, woe is me. I think it's great for her because it puts her back in the spotlight, something other than being crazy, and and he gets back in the spotlight. But now let me move forward from Britney Spears because it seems like we still need more information on it, and let's get to Joe's story because Joe put up this interesting story. So Joe, introduce your story.
It's an important case. It's not my story. I mean, I covered it, but it's a pretty important thing that I don't think enough people are talking about. There's a case going on now, which is Missouri versus Biden.
It's
Which-
huge. Yeah.
I
Which is
covered that Reddit. It was a good case.
A massive case, and there was a decision that was issued this week, which was very powerfully worded by the judge. A powerful rebuke of the Biden administration, calling it what was the term he used? I think the worst abuse of First Amendment rights that's ever happened in our country. And he was talking
with that, yeah.
and he's talking about what was discussed in the Twitter files with the efforts by the government to suppress free speech. And that's what this whole case is about, that they're looking for declaratory relief and to get the government to stop doing it. So part of what they did is they brought a motion for an injunction because there's so many ties between government agents and big tech, specifically Twitter and Meta, that they wanted to say that they were looking for injunctive relief, saying that during the course of this litigation, that the government should be stopped by the court from continuing this abuse by being allowed to contact Twitter or Facebook for the purposes of telling them we want you to suppress this tweet or that comment on Facebook or whatever, and that they should be prohibited from doing that. And the judge, for the most part, granted the relief that was issued a 155-page memorandum ruling that was scathing against the Biden administration, calling it the worst abuse of First Amendment rights in history. I mean, that's an astonishing thing to say. And does that mean that Missouri is going to win? No, but it means that they're they've come really far in the way they presented this case towards convincing the court that there's been real abuse, because in order to get injunctive relief, they have to show, part of the step is they have to show a likelihood of success on the merits. And the judge seems to believe, from the way he words it, that there's a very likely success, there's very strong likelihood of success on the merits. So, I mean, when you look at and you look at what they recognize, so this is from the state of Missouri after they got this decision. This is from their page, basically giving highlights as to different things that are contained in the memorandum ruling. And if you look through what it says there, where right below it says, in the order the court recognized state's evidence of unconscionable federal censorship activities, the judge specifically found, and you read through them, you could spend like a couple minutes reading through them. Some of them are just amazing. That virtually all the free speech suppressed was conservative free speech. At least 22 times the White House engaged in unrelenting pressure against tech companies. White House defendants engaged in coercion to induce social media companies to suppress speech. I mean, it goes on and on with the way the judge was so angry. It seems so disturbed by the way the
social
Biden
media companies gave the FBI and the White House privileged access to report things in a way that would be elevated tickets. They had scheduled bi-weekly meetings between them and the various agencies, and also the Census Bureau.
The motivation of Dr. Fauci, was specifically a takedown of protected free speech. I mean, it's just like one thing after another, which is just he's killing the government here. I can't remember. I'm sorry, you were saying something, Viva. I didn't mean to
oh no, I'm just saying it's obvious to anybody who's paying attention to watch the Twitter files. They had Jen Psaki on the freaking press secretary podium saying, we tell them we flag certain sensitive content, and then we find out they're meeting with them.
He mentioned, if you look there, it says former White House press secretary Jen Psaki issued a threat of legal consequences to social media, not censor misinformation more aggressively. No,
and then you get these liars at CNN, MSNBC saying, this judgment's crazy. He's citing Barnes had a good one. They're citing Benjamin Franklin or whoever they were citing. The media misrepresenting this is over the top, and they're also not exaggerating the importance of it. It's a preliminary injunction. It's temporary. It's not necessarily an indication of what's going to happen on the merits, although, in order to have been issued, they have to show the likelihood of success, color of right, yada, balance of inconvenience. But it's like people don't want to stop the government from compelling, coercing, or behind the stage nudging social media to censor. They want censorship. They want to go to Facebook. They want to have Zuckerberg create their Twitter so they can have their echo chambers. They're demented people.
Yeah, but here's the thing: they're appealing it, and it's so astonishing. First of all, it's an injunction. It's an injunction that's issued directly against Karine Jean-Pierre, the DHS, FBI, DOJ, every one of them, basically, and saying you're not allowed to continue to infringe on protected free speech, not all speech, simply on protected free speech. And that is being appealed by the government, which is basically their statement. No, don't stop us from infringing on protected free speech. It's such a crazy position that they're taking. When you're saying good luck, Kurt, you're right. Because how do you sit as an attorney and try to make that argument that we,
good
as
luck
the government,
in particular, because Louisiana is in the Fifth Circuit. And the Fifth Circuit has been very friendly to conservative causes as of late. So I'm not imagining it's going to go well.
Yeah,
but this is somebody in the chat, and I made the point I was thinking about, and that is, we know all of this. This is not a surprise to anybody here on our side that all of this is absolutely 100% true. The government is shutting down conservative voices. The tech companies are colluding with the big state. This is called the deep state in action. So, I mean, none of this is surprising.
It's not surprising. It's significant. That it's
significant,
it's a court finding.
But I also want to note that it's great for the judge to issue this order, and thumbs up. Finally we get some kind of legal pushback. But I will say this doesn't come out of nowhere. This comes from a lot of legal work by a lot of motivated lawyers on the plaintiff sides for the state of Missouri and their allies. And so thumbs up to them, because they established a factual record for this judge to issue such an order.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they've done it. I'll tell you, the attorney general from Missouri, and also from, what was the other state, Arkansas, Louisiana. So it was Bailey and Landry. They must have done phenomenal work in presenting. I think they presented 20,000 documents and evidence to support the findings here. And they highlighted over 1,400 facts from 20,000 pages of evidence. 20,000 pages, not documents. But yeah, the amount of time it takes to go through that and then organize it and then present it in a way that is comprehensible is so many thousands of man hours that had to have gone into this in order to lay it out in a way that's digestible for the court. And clearly the court is digesting it in a rather healthy way.
I don't know if anybody knows this, but how much of this were they able to find out either through discovery or just because Elon bought Twitter?
There was some limited discovery. There was some limited discovery, including a deposition of Fauci, which I'm half tempted to try to get a copy of because that sounds hilarious. But yeah, so we would expect more as the discovery goes.
Although
deeper.
this was filed before the Twitter files dropped. This was filed in May of 2022. So
yes, but that's why some of we were saying that a lot of the stuff they discovered in the Twitter files should make its way by way of amendments into RFK's lawsuit, Donald Trump's lawsuit, and Louisiana as well.
Yeah, no, but this is a great case, and we should all be on top of this because
how do you have a news organization, and all of them seem to be this way, support the government secretly meeting with corporations to shut down speech of citizens and say it's outrageous for the court to not allow that? I don't get it. Well, I mean, I do get it.
A lot of things like I don't get.
Yeah.
Like why are all these free speech? Why are all these like New York Times and CNN and everything super happy about daddy government being inside their editorial rooms, telling them
they want to be governed harder?
When is that a thing?
No, well, I think it's monetary in nature, because don't forget those rules are for us. We're the ones that can't. When they're censoring us, they're not censoring the New York Times, and we're their competition. That's the reason why they'll say, "Hey, we don't want like even when we say we fact check them, right? But like, oh, they're telling lies. They're fact checking. Video gets 1 million views. They'll be like, we don't want them to say that. They're the ones spreading disinformation.
That's great.
Yeah, where's the fact checkers on the Biden administration? It seems like fact checking is kind of gone. We don't see that anymore.
They're the ones with the white powder that they just left.
And I think this week they're busy trying to figure out how cluster bombs are actually good for the environment.
A little nuclear war.
It tills the soil.
Google ginger NBA player. There are lots, even black. Okay. And Ghazni. It's good to see another Catholic struggling with the prodigal son lesson.
Yeah, that Bible has a lot of good lessons in it. It's amazing if people pick it up.
Gentlemen, I don't want to start the Exodus.
No. Actually, we're about to get out of here, Viva.
I got to go too.
Read these couple last super chats, and then we're going to say our goodbyes. This is that one is tied to Louisiana v. Biden. So
it's the same case. It's Missouri and Louisiana joined together against Biden.
So let me go because it is time. Thank you guys so much for spending the 1 hour and a half with us. Let's start with you, Southern Law. Please tell the people where they can find you and what you're up to going forward.
Well, thanks to everybody who super chatted for Eric so that he can stay on the run. That's important. I'm Northern Law today in New Hampshire, but I'll be back Southern Law next week. And if anybody wants to see what I got to say, just come check out the channel. There's some incredible secret things there.
And the mods have been putting it in the chat. And Eric will put them in the description if he hasn't already. Please don't forget to subscribe to everyone who you see on this panel. Steve Ghazni, let them know who you are. Well, they know who you are. Where to find you and what you're up to.
Yeah, I'm SteveGhazni.com. I'm going to have a Rumble show at 8 p.m. Tonight, Eastern Standard Time. I'm going to have a birthday celebration for one of our chatters, Danielle. And so stop by tonight at 8 p.m. for just to get together, update, and kind of update where I am. I'm not streaming quite as much as I used to because I got some big stuff on my platter, but good to see everybody here.
Uncivil Law. Tell the people what you got coming up.
Well, I'm at the channel Uncivil Law. As soon as this stream is over, I'll be posting a video about a Florida man who tried to resolve his disputes over a laundry room in a homeowners association by shooting some people, and as being tried as relating to that. So maybe don't settle the laundry room dispute with the murder. Always a good plan. I'm also planning on covering the suitcase murder trial that's coming up pretty soon. And I'm also interested in covering the Crumbly case, the parents. I was reading their decision recently from the Court of Appeals saying why the parents can be charged for in relation to their son doing the school shooting. And I think it's a really interesting case where they're pushing the law very severely. So I'm interested in following that case a lot. So those are some upcoming trials I'll be covering. And then no Supreme Court analysis for a while there on session. So we'll have to find something else to do. That's what's coming up on my channel.
We usually live good logic for last, but I'm not doing that to you today. Tell the people where to find you. And I'll say this. This guy's got me watching him at like 9 o'clock and 8 o'clock here. It's been so good because he's got such great stuff. I'm like part 1, part 2. I'm watching this wife is like, whatever. But go ahead, Joe.
Well,
tell them what's up.
Thank you very much. I'm Good Logic. You can find me at goodlogic.locals.com. That's goodlogic.locals.com. I stream every night, 6 nights a week. Well, and during the summer, I'm not going to stream it. Never on Friday nights, and during the summer, rarely on Saturday nights. But I highly recommend you check out my Locals, which is where I try to get into humanities, where I try to understand people a little bit better. Like yesterday, I was going through the difference between. I was discussing the difference between when you were defining morality and someone has justification for the difference between justified immorality that's unjustified, justified immorality, and morality that is so justified that it actually becomes more moral to actually do the same actions. For example, by way of example, when you deal with abortion, so you can have a woman who's a crazy woman who is she's got a power struggle that she enjoys killing her own fetus. You could have a woman who's justified or has a presumed justification based on need that she feels is justified, and then you have a life-saving measure. So I try to classify and understand our world and our society, and that's why I urge you to check me out there, goodlogic.locals.com, and also obviously on YouTube as well. Go Viva, go Viva. Give us final thoughts. Give us your final thoughts.
Locals.com and on YouTube, as he said. Here's my man Viva. The man, the myth, the legend. Go ahead, Viva.
I'm waiting to see if I get a text right now that allows me to make an announcement of an interview that I might have coming up at 3 o'clock today. You all know me, Viva Frei, vivabarneslaw.locals.com. I caught a smallmouth bass with my drone. The highlight of my life, hold on, I see the ... dots coming in on the text. So you can find me there. The Angry Viva is on Twitter at @VivaFrei. And I've just given Yashar Ali a slight piece of my mind. I didn't realize now you can actually type in bold directly to Twitter. And by the way, it's confirmed. 3 o'clock today, Nathaniel Pavlovsky, who is the son of Artur Pavlovsky, who's the preacher. Yep, the preacher in Canada who was locked up. Apparently, they've come after the son as well. So, regimes make martyrs of the righteous. So, 3 o'clock today on my channel. I'm going to go set that up right now.
Well, listen, I'm Nate the Lawyer, and I got to let these guys get out of here. You guys know where you can find me, NateTheLawyer.locals.com. Everywhere. Just type Nate the Lawyer into Google. You'll find me. For my guests, though, don't forget, people, there's about 12 or 1,300 people in here. Don't forget to subscribe to all my friends here. They have some great content. And if you like more of this stuff, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Hit the bell for notifications. And we are going to be out in 3, 2,